Catholic. Allow me to begin with a simple truth. A state should never have to afford standard rights to its citizens as a form of thank you, and that isn't the intention of the motion we bring before you now. Tonight, myself and my colleagues in the Social Democrats will talk of a contribution made by some of our most vulnerable workers that is unquantifiable, and we will speak of a debt that remains unpaid. But that contribution from our workers and the debt we as a state owe them for the manner in which their labour has been undervalued was prevalent in our society long before COVID-19 ever was. But we hope and we expect the motion we bring before you here now will give deputies across the chamber the opportunity to turn words into action, to give substance to the applause, to make meaningful action that will improve paying conditions of workers, the endpoint of the appreciation that has been expressed over the past few months. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and in the midst of our national lockdown, I stood in the Dáil and thanked frontline workers, many of them in low-paid and precarious employment, for risking their lives and their health to keep our society and our economy going. Those workers are all over Ireland, in every single one of our constituencies. They have been the ones who have been essential, ensuring that our food production lines remained operational, that our supermarkets remained opened. They collected our waste throughout the crisis and ensured that our hospitals were clean and our frontline essential workers could carry out their duties in conditions that were sanitary and safe. My words are similar to many other deputies who stood in the House during those first few weeks of this new Dáil, many of whom find themselves in government now. And together we promised that when the chance came, we would offer more than thanks. Well, today is the first opportunity that we have to live up to that promise. This is a chance to ensure an enhanced focus within government on creating good jobs, on enhancing workers' rights. We can recognise that access to jobs where workers have a voice, jobs that provide a level of autonomy, a decent income, security of employment and decent working conditions are an integral part of public policy, given how they contribute to better health and well-being and by tackling inequalities and building self-efficacy and combating poverty. To achieve that aim, we have sought to be constructive in the motion we present here this evening. I hope the wording of the motion as originally presented by us will look familiar. The Minister, you'll recognise that it's almost identical to that which was part of the New Decade, New Approach Agreement which restored devolved government in the north of Ireland and was approved by the previous government in January just gone. Our request in this regard is very modest. We accept that the Social Democrats and Fine Gael view the world through a very different gaze and sought to meet you at your level because the advancement of better workers' rights is all that we seek forward in this motion. We ask that workers in the Republic were afforded the same recognition and promised protections as those in the North. We thought that while we can disagree on many issues that pertain to government spend and taxation, that the advancement of workers' protection during these unparalleled times could be a point of unity across the chamber, but your needless amendment has clearly sought to deny even those modest gains. Establishing a task force to give effect to this resolution and to propose concrete actions is essential, given how weak the programme for government is on workers' rights and how silent it is on the issue of collective bargaining. According to the document, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party have absolutely nothing to say about trade union rights, about workplace representation and collective bargaining. The section in the programme for government, Better Work-Life Balance, contains a measly 2 sentences, only 30 words, which in themselves are vague and non-committal. Minister, your amendment to our motion has very purposely sought to remove any reference to collective bargaining, workers' protections and workplace representation so as to completely undermine the spirit of the motion and leave behind something which is self-serving and meaningless. This is in keeping with Fine Gael's market-first, laissez-faire approach to workers' rights that we've witnessed over the past 9 years of your government that has been to the detriment of our lowest paid workers. However, this is not the change that Fianna Fáil and the Green Party promised the electorate in February. If the Green Party will not take a stand for workers so that environmental justice can truly go hand in hand with social justice and a just transition for their workers, then what is the use? If Fianna Fáil are not going to be a more socially conscious, worker-friendly version of Fine Gael and government, then who exactly do you intend to be? Recent research by Oxfam indicates that Ireland has the 5th largest number of billionaires per capita in the world. Ireland has the 2nd highest incidence of low pay in the EU, affecting 23% of our workers in 2019. By further contrast, last year also saw Ireland register the highest growth in gross domestic product in the Union for the 3rd year in a row. This is directly connected to the fact that only 32% of employees in Ireland were covered by a collective agreement. This drops by almost half when considering only workers in the private sector. This is compared to an average in the EU peer group of 76%, with 78% in the Netherlands, 90% in Sweden and Finland, and over 95% in Austria, Belgium and France. This is not simply a moral issue, it's an economic one. There is a very strong correlation between countries with higher trade union density and levels of collective bargaining coverage and countries with lower levels of income inequality. Labour's share of income has been falling across most of the Western world in recent decades, and this phenomenon is particularly prevalent in Ireland. This means that those on lower and middle incomes, those who tend to spend a much higher percentage of their incomes and in turn boost our local economies, have much less money to spend. Collective bargaining, therefore, does not damage our economic competitiveness, it enhances it. Ireland are ranked 24th in the Global Competitiveness Index, lagging behind those aforementioned countries with much higher levels of collective bargaining: Austria, Belgium, France, Denmark, the Netherlands, Finland, despite those countries often having premiers who would consider themselves to be radical centrists. Ireland is unusual in the European context in that employers are not legally obliged to engage with trade unions to negotiate pay agreements or other conditions of employment. This goes a long way to explaining. This explains much of our lower level of collective bargaining coverage. We are simply way out of line with EU norms in the area. It is an undeniable fact that the Irish state owes a debt of gratitude to its workers, particularly those in low pay and insecure work. However, let's be very clear here. COVID-19 has made this invisible work visible. Yes, this does not mean that work did not exist before COVID-19. It was merely those in power have placed little value on it. Those who work in low pay and in precarious work, overrepresented by women, by migrants, by our younger workers, have always done the most crucial work to keep our economy and society thriving. And they have always received the least recognition for it. Although this recognition changed somewhat during COVID, the pay and conditions of workers did not. Despite increases in the national minimum wage in recent years, it is wholly inadequate, and it is currently 18% less than that of a living wage. We have a chance to turn that around starting tonight, to turn our collapse for these workers into secure jobs with at least the security of a minimum wage and access to collective bargaining rights. There is a structural problem of low pay in the Irish economy, resulting in many people who work living in poverty or work in multiple jobs to give themselves and their family a decent standard of living. We have a shameful situation where too many workers are in precarious work, underemployment and dependent on welfare support. For many women working part-time due to childcare costs or care responsibilities, this work simply does not pay and is a huge contributing factor to increase in child and family poverty. In many sectors, there is a lack of entitlement to basic protections such as sick pay and statutory leave for many workers, and an increase in casualisation of work with uncertainty about hours and days of work. A task force is critical because of the nature of just how interlocking and reinforcing these individual issues are. For example, even if you were to introduce a living wage overnight, if an employee was on a precarious contract, their hours are just going to be cut. We know this. It is for this reason that a task force needs to look at a holistic approach to examine the issues as a whole and put in a suite of measures to ensure our workers are paid well in secure jobs. We must also acknowledge the gendered implications of low pay. The majority of those in low-paid and precarious work are women, and tonight will be an important measure in going some way in helping to close the gender pay gap. Also, in the midst of the critical Black Lives Matter movement, we must also acknowledge the critical role played by migrant workers in keeping our economy going, again often in insecure and underpaid work. It is critical that alongside the trade unions and employers on the task force that we envision will be women's groups, will be migrant groups, will be representatives from civic society, all around the table and discussing how we can improve the lives of our workers. It's time to turn our collapse into real action. This is a chance for our government parties to show that their failure to make substantial commitments on progressing workplace protections and collective bargaining in the programme for government was simply an oversight, and that this government will not adopt the same old approach when it comes to workers' rights.